Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Merriam, and I am the CEO of C-City. C-City is how the tech industry and community collaborate for results. We work with tech companies and workers alike to ensure our region continues to thrive for decades to come. This is our first event in our series Beyond the Build, and I'm super excited about this series. It shines a light on collaborations between tech companies and the public and nonprofit sectors. We know that our strengths can be complementary and accelerate the path to a livable, sustainable, and equitable community. This evening, we're going to be talking about housing affordability. Many of our local tech companies have been stepping up really big with substantial investments and partnerships to increase access to affordable housing. We've gathered some of the greatest leaders that our region has to offer, taking on this important work, and are going to dive into the models that they are helping to create. One quick reminder that this conversation is considered off the record, and if you are with the media and want to publish a story, to reach out to C-City directly, and we will work with you on that. So, quick context setting, and then I'm going to invite our panelists up. So it's no surprise our local housing and rental markets are pretty extreme these days. Just today, the Seattle Times reported double-digit increase in the price of a home in December. The median price of a home in King County is now $725,000. And at that same time, apartment vacancy rates have gone to nearly 10%. They were hovering around 4% pre-pandemic. And even though there's downward pressure on this rental market, it does not translate into our region being considered affordable. According to a study by Challenge Seattle, a typical registered nurse that makes roughly $80,000 a year was priced out of their home or the home purchase market in Seattle in about 2013, priced out of Renton in 2017. Auburn and Federal Way might still have some affordable options, but if trends continue, these community members would have to move further from city centers to find an affordable home. Most of what we're going to be talking about this evening is related to that group: the nurses, the firefighters, the teachers, the workers that ensure our community's health and functioning. And to ground this conversation in some common language, we have this great infographic on affordability that Luanda is going to put up on the screen right now. So there are specific ways of measuring housing affordability according to HUD. In King County, the 2019 median household income is about $95,000. So that means if your household makes less than the median, your cost of housing takes up a bigger portion of your annual income and the need for subsidies increases. Pretty basic. Many of the workers that I previously mentioned fall into this middle income or workforce housing group. So as our panelists talk tonight, you may hear them refer to these middle income households or low income households. And for low income, you can see on the infographic, in our area, that's defined by a household with an annual income of about $28,000 to $57,000. Okay, all right, I'm gonna stop talking because I wanna make sure that we get into content, and we've got some really great panelists for you this evening. First, I'd like to introduce Alice Schobe, who is the Global Director of Amazon in the community. And she has formed the company's community impact strategy focused on ensuring young people who face systemic barriers to education have the resources they need to thrive. She has developed keystone community programs, including Amazon's Housing Equity Fund, which we're going to talk about this evening, as well as Amazon Future Engineers, Disaster Relief by Amazon, and the Right Now Needs Fund. So welcome, Alice. Nice to have you. Next is Faith Pettis. She is a partner with Pacifica Law Group, where she serves on as bond counsel and outside counsel to state and local governments with a focus on housing, education, and nonprofit finance. In 2014, the mayor of Seattle appointed Faith to co-chair the city's Housing Affordability and Livability Task Force, which was charged with delivering a 10-year plan to address housing affordability. She also previously served 2 terms as chair of the statewide Affordable Housing Advisory Board. Welcome, Faith. Super nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us. As Senior Director in Microsoft Philanthropies, Jane Broom is responsible for the company's philanthropic strategy in its home state of Washington, including the company's Affordable Housing Initiative, which they launched 2 years ago. So welcome, Jane. Nice to have you. And finally, Shkëlqim Kelmendi is the founder and executive director of Housing Connector, a B2B organization partnering with property owners and managers to eliminate barriers and increase access to housing for individuals exiting homelessness. In 2020, Housing Connector was recognized by Fast Company as a world-changing idea, and Shkëlqim has also been selected by the Puget Sound Business Journal as an Innovator of the Year. Welcome, Shkëlqim. Really nice to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming. I'm super excited about the conversation. So, just to dive right into things, excuse me, Faith, I want to start with you. Given your role as co-chair of Seattle Housing Affordability Livability Agenda and your more recent participation on the Middle Income Affordable Housing or Affordable Advisory Council, these are like mouthfuls to say. They are a lot of words jammed in here. Can you just start by giving us a little bit of a broad landscape on the policies around local affordable housing?
Sure, happy to do that. And if Londa could put up the slide that I gave you, that would be great. First off, can I just start by saying I am so excited both to be on this panel with these co-speakers because they're all wonderful people. And I'm also really excited that people are really interested in attending seminars like this because it just shows a care and commitment to the community that I think is what Seattle has always been about. And I'm gratified that there are people out there who want to learn about these issues. It's important that we get involved and participate and vote and are excited about learning more. So thank you for being here tonight. Let me just start by complicating the field a little bit. I think one of the reasons why this is such a difficult area to understand is because it is difficult. There's a lot of programs, there's a lot of people involved in providing affordable housing. And I think it's important to separate out the affordable housing crisis into three different crises. I think we try to conflate all of them too much. There's a homelessness crisis. That's the first one. And I think the best thing I heard about that is it is the price of prosperity is homelessness. The second crisis is an affordable rental crisis that impacts low-income families. And the third crisis is a shortage of actual housing for people to buy, home ownership housing. And those are three different crises, but they're all hitting us at the same time. And they have different solutions for each of them, but we conflate them all. And so we look at homelessness on the street and think it's a rental problem as well, and it's not. So let's just, that I think is a good place to start. So the slide that is up here talks about some of the different programs, and this helps put in context the lay of the land about how this housing gets funded. So we had a little bit of an orientation from Nicholas about area median income, and that's what's across the top. You go from no income up to about 200% of income. And these are the different programs that take care of people in those different sectors. So the Washington State Housing Trust Fund is a biennially appropriated very large fund that has put out about $1 billion for housing across the state since its inception in 1986. They've done about 50,000 units of housing over time. Local governments and housing authorities also operate in that 0 to about 80% of AMI income space. And when you vote for the Seattle Housing Levy, that's where your dollars go. They put money into capital dollars for housing projects. The next one is the State Housing Finance Commission, and they operate from about 30% to about 120% of AMI. And they have programs that range from rental to homeownership programs. And then you have the private sector who operates from about, this is a little generous to say they get down to about 60% of AMI. They're really more around the 100 to 200% of AMI. And then you have federal programs that go from Section 8, which help the very lowest or no income folks, all the way up to your house mortgage insurance deductions, right? That helps people who are wealthy too. So I think the big gap here that's missing that this chart doesn't quite show well enough is the middle income gap. So there are programs that really help people between 0 and 80% of AMI, but between about 80 and 120% of AMI, except for folks like the Housing Finance Commission who do some work around home ownership in that area and the private sector, there really are not programs locally to help with that gap. And that's one of the biggest things that we're missing in this area. Nicholas, do you need more, or do you want to go on?
No, I think that's a great start. I mean, I kind of want to dive right in on Seattle really quickly. And everybody knows Seattle is a fairly progressive city. Why is density so hard to do in our region? Because the theory would be that density decreases the cost, thus making things more affordable. So why do we have this problem? Maybe that's too existential. So
I'm glad you said this was off the record. So one of, I think, the biggest reasons why is that we have an issue with the way Seattle has been constructed through the years. It's a very neighborhood-based city, right? With a lot of power in neighborhoods. And we have these beautiful single-family neighborhoods that people like to see preserved. And unfortunately, we have more people coming in than we have space to put them. So one of the HALA recommendations, that Housing Affordability and Livability Agenda recommendations, way back in 2014 and 2015, was to gently diversify those single-family neighborhoods and allow more types of housing in those neighborhoods. So accessory dwelling units, backyard cottages, granny flats, allowing condo units in a gentle diversification of those neighborhoods without losing the character of them. It would be a great start. But this is one of the areas that's been really hard to break through in Seattle and all across the country.
Great. Thanks. I want to spin over to Alice, and just Alice, the amazing work that you've been doing over at Amazon. You just announced a whopping $2 billion housing equity fund. Bravo, congratulations. We know it's going to focus on workforce housing, but can you give us a little bit of an insight about how your team is thinking about allocation of those dollars across geographies and project types?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. It's great to not literally see you, but to be with you in this conversation. Just as a quick background, I joined Amazon 4 years ago, as Nicholas said, but most of my career prior to that was in the all my career was in the social sector and predominantly around housing. So this is an area that I'm personally very passionate about. The $2 billion Housing Equity Fund announcement that we made on January 6th, tough day to make an announcement, I'll say that, was really building on some of the unique assets and opportunities of Amazon. So what we did is think about what was the problem that we wanted to solve. And looking at similar data to that both you and Faith have already presented, is we could see that government tends to focus on either very low income housing or home ownership. I mean, several of us on this call probably get homeowner tax benefits. So the federal government tends to focus on those two extremes. And so, as Faith said, there's several different problems that are happening in our community at the same time. Amazon made a significant contribution to family homelessness by supporting Mary's Place and building a homeless shelter into our headquarters. And so we saw this as a moment of time to go more into the workforce housing and into that space where government isn't as active and as involved. So there's three things that we're really hoping to achieve with the Housing Equity Fund. First, we've set a goal to quickly preserve or create new 25,000 units in 3 jurisdictions: in Puget Sound, in the Arlington, Virginia area, and in Nashville, Tennessee. So Amazon likes to do things fast, as you may have noticed. So speed is absolutely one of our goals. This is a crisis. And so we want to leverage our DNA, our way of being, to quickly produce housing. And one of the quickest ways we can do that is to leverage our scale. So that's our second goal, is that we have a scale and financial opportunity to be able to be investors below market at scale and to move quickly and preserve housing or create it, as I said. So, do it quickly, leverage our scale. But the third is also really super important, especially given our country's history, which is to recognize who's at the table when you're building assets. And so we saw a unique opportunity to focus in two areas. One is on organizations that are minority-led. Black, Brown, Indigenous leaders often have trouble getting to the table, especially getting it to the table to access fast resources where you're leveraging relationships and other things that may not have already been built in a community. And so we've set aside $125 million to support both organizations with what their needs may be to get at the table. Is that extra legal fees? Is that some other kind of capacity building? We're really open on what that looks like, but we really believed if we were going to be solving the problem long term, that we also had to be supporting leaders and organizations of color. And then the second area was really looking at that there are government players that aren't often brought to the table to help solve the housing crisis, but actually have resources and opportunities. And we thought there would be an opportunity for creativity. So some of that opportunity will also be to support libraries, school districts, transit authorities, look at what resources they have, whether it's around land, financing, or other, who knows, efforts to also be creative players. So we're looking at 25,000 units in 5 years, $2 billion, $2 billion plus 125 million. And it really is that speed, working at scale, and then really supporting both minority-led organizations and government to work differently are our goals for the program.
I want to drop right into the weeds on this for a really quick second, if you don't mind. Sure. So those are super impressive goals. And I think for our audience, just reminding them, hey, the timeline on housing and upzoning and density and all these topics are decades. They generally aren't like a year or two. So I know everybody here is used to moving really, really fast. So how do you think about working across you listed off 3 main geographies, but I would imagine within those geographies, there's multiple municipalities that you've got to interact with. So like, how do you and your team work across such breadth so quickly?
I mean, I think it's about, finding the right partners. So we are building out a team. An incredible leader, Catherine Buell, is based in our Arlington, Virginia office, and she's leading the Housing Equity Fund. And so we are adding some additional team members, which we're super excited about. But I think it really is about, finding the right community partners. And working with them, and then really looking for the opportunities of scale. So when we announced the fund on January 6th, we announced two first investments. One of them was here in Puget Sound with the King County Housing Authority, and I know Microsoft and others have worked with them. And one thing that's great about something like a big housing authority is they are working at scale, and they're out, getting it done at scale. So that was super exciting. And then the organization that we worked with in Crystal City, the neighborhood that our headquarters are based in Virginia, also really found this great opportunity of a building that was going to flip. Frankly, it was a private offering. It was a building that was going to flip. But for Amazon's financing, it would have flipped. It would have been sold to a private owner. It would have been remodeled. And then the rents would have been raised. And it's a very large apartment building. And so the other piece that we believe that we'll be able to enable by working with this combination of both speed and then truly flexible and creative financing is that when these opportunities come up, that we'll be able to help seize them. Because I would say that real estate is slow, but I think in some ways we've also, as a world, accepted the slowness. And that's one of the things that I think collectively we've all got to kind of push on to say, we got to move faster.
Love it. I love it. Let's speed it up. I want to zap into your future a little bit and go to Jane. Jane, big kudos to you. Microsoft was the very first tech company to put up a housing fund. You're now 2 years in. How's it going? What have you learned so far? What sage wisdom do you have for Alice?
Oh, well, I thought we had this panel at 5 o'clock because, you know, we could have cocktails or tea because we have so much to talk about this topic. I just want to first acknowledge, you know, Faith and Shkëlqim, you know, both have been so helpful to us in the last 2 years, giving us some guidance, especially for Faith, who's, if you don't know Faith, basically all roads in affordable housing lead to Faith Pettis. And so we have been incredibly thankful for her guidance and leadership. And of course, to Alice at Amazon, who's been my partner in crime for a long time, Alice. And it's so great to have you guys on board. We need you so badly. And the announcement was really terrific to hear. I guess, you know, I'll kind of cut to the chase. You know, man, this is hard. This is not an easy thing to do. And, you know, I think from our perspective, we got involved 2 years ago, really started working on the initiative about 3 years ago. Just, you know, like everything we do in Microsoft Philanthropies in this region is about two things. One, it's about inclusive economic opportunities for people and improving overall quality of life. And that's what we do. And what we started to hear more and more and more from everybody is housing, and housing becoming one of the biggest barriers and frankly, biggest threats to those two things, economic opportunity and quality of life. So that's really what led us to work on this. Our work is on the East Side, primarily. The 750 million that we've committed to this work, 25 million is philanthropic, similar to what Alice talked about. It's a grant-based program, but it's focused on homelessness and the work that predominant, in fact, I won't say this, that our region must address. The center of gravity, as we all know, oftentimes is Seattle, but it is a region-wide issue. So that's one area. But the investment dollars are primarily focused on the east side of King County. So the bigger cities, Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, the job centers, really, Renton and so forth, really because there wasn't a lot of activity. I think you had jurisdictions, neighboring jurisdictions really working to try to figure out what to do, but there was no sort of mass energy and lift happening, from our opinion, on the east side. And frankly, that's where so much of the growth is. You know, Microsoft's growth, now Amazon's growth, so much of the high-tech growth really is on the east side. And we've got this once in a lifetime opportunity to address housing. At the same time, we're building a transportation infrastructure on the east side, and we're driving new business and new jobs on the east side. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. It is hard to go back in time and redo this. So if we're building the east side as we are today, and we're not thinking about housing, shame on us, and we will regret it in the future. So that's really the focus. And, you know, at the end of the day, quite frankly, there just isn't that much affordable housing on the east side. And it's something that's got to greatly improve. So that's why our focus is really there. You ask how it's going. It's going great. It's really hard. It's really fun. We are roughly at about 450 million that we've committed, investments that we've committed, that we think will help produce about near about 8,000 units. That's kind of where we're at right now. The thing for us that has been true from day one with the announcement, we have very crisp, very clear guidance from our CEO and our CFO and our president that this is a tool to unlock broader systems change and to drive greater investment in this work. It is not sort of a here's some money, we're going to do some stuff, and then toodles, we'll see you later. It is, they are expecting us to use the dollars and the investment to catalyze either policy change at the local level, local, state, potentially even federal level, and then two, to, you know, kind of like what Alice talked about, is deploy the financial expertise and the resources that we have at Microsoft to join the discussion in the community to help create new financial models that will attract new private capital. So for us, those are the two success metrics: policy change, new financial models that attract new capital. If we don't do those two things from our executive standpoint, we won't be successful. And it takes a lot of time. So I'll stop there, but that's sort of the general overview.
I want to ask a real quick follow-up on that. Have you had notable successes in either of those two categories? And if so, can you share an example?
Well, we have had more success on the innovative financial models, for sure. And frankly, I mentioned Faith. You know, Faith has been super helpful in this, and for years has been thinking about different ways to use creative capital or innovative capital, private capital. And in a lot of ways, us collaborating with people like Faith, people like the Seattle Foundation with their Evergreen Impact Fund, you know, it's been an opportunity to sort of put some of those ideas into an existing structure. So so the Evergreen Impact Housing Fund is an example. We created a new fund with the Housing Finance Commission called ELAP, which is all about a land acquisition program that we're going to focus specifically on the east side. There's a new program that we developed with some developers named Stream called Urban Housing Ventures that is all about buying market rate buildings that already exist in major job centers like Bellevue, and using financing from Freddie Mac, from local banks and CRA, private equity, and so forth, to then purchase those buildings, change the rents on 40% of the units, and quickly offer those to affordable, or transition those to affordable units. So those are some ideas of how we've done the financing. Policy is taking longer, I will say that. But Bellevue, if you're listening, we're making progress, and it's super exciting. At the state level, MFTE for state legislators, let's get that done, get some movement on that. And, you know, we're not giving up, but we got work to do.
I think everybody here is aware that policy movement can be slow and arduous at points. So, yes. So yeah, it's no surprise at least to me, that you've had success around the financial models. And I've read about the Stream investment, and it is a very creative collaboration. So again, another bravo to you and Microsoft. I want to swap over to Shkëlqim. Shkëlqim, Housing Connector. I love Housing Connector. I think it's a brilliant model. And in a lot of ways, what you're doing is you've created a sustainable, innovative private-public partnership. Can you just tell us about it? Like, talk us through the model. I find it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I mean, first off, like, we believe that we need more affordable housing in our community, which is why I'm so glad of the work that Amazon and Microsoft are doing. But as we just heard, that takes a lot of time, and it's really costly. And we know that there's people in need of housing today. And so in starting Housing Connector, we said, what can we do to ensure that folks get connected to units that are available right now? Specifically, we wanted to narrow our focus, and we saw a gap in our community where folks that had barriers such as low credit score, an eviction, or criminal history, they couldn't find anyone that would rent to them because they were seen as too risky of a tenant. And we felt like, one, that was a absurd problem in our community, but two, we felt that that was a problem that we could solve. And so what we did was we approached property owners and managers throughout the region and provided them with incentives and risk mitigation in exchange for them lowering or waiving their credit or their screening criteria so more individuals could access their homes. In a sense, we were creating artificial supply and making it accessible to folks in the community. On the other side of the equation, we saw some significant inefficiencies in our system where case managers in the community were having to cold call landlords, apply to over 20 units just to have somebody be accepted. And so what we decided to do was to streamline the entire search process for them. And the way we kind of bring the supply and the demand together is we decided to partner with Zillow, a local Seattle company here, and develop a mechanism that brings these two parties together and in a sense create a new marketplace. But one of the things that we did, Nick, is instead of just creating a one-off site or a platform, we actually worked with them to build this function within Zillow.com. And the reason for that is one, we felt like this was more sustainable, but two, we felt like this was a way to scale this model quickly and potentially scale it nationally. And so what happens now is we have properties with available units that list them on Zillow, and case managers able to search for these units in real time and get their clients into housing faster. We launched this at the end of 2019, and so it's been about 16 or 17 months. In that time frame, we've been able to house over 1,450 folks directly from homelessness into permanent housing. 70% of those folks are individuals of color. And I think, for folks on this call, the housing industry has a long history of systemic racism. And so one of the things that we do is by pre-negotiating criteria, we actually make the levers of discrimination obsolete in this process because those landlords can't use those levers to deny somebody housing. And so, like I mentioned, 1,450 folks, we have 490 properties that have opened up and partnered with us. They account for 32,000 units in our portfolio. So, this is not us trying to reinvent the wheel. Really what we're doing is just trying to add capacity and efficiency in systems that already exist, but in a way that moves the needle right now for the community.
That's really incredible. I am astounded. 1,400 people in roughly 18 months is outstanding. So another big bravo to you. I feel like I'm just congratulating everybody on this call. I mean, you all do such impressive work. I want to turn back to Alice for a quick second and jump back into housing and Amazon. So Amazon's known for leveraging highly autonomous teams to drive innovation. I mean, it's not a secret. There's all sorts of literature out there about the management structures and culture at Amazon, like working backwards, single-threaded leaders, the leadership principles that you have there. As somebody that's coming out of the social impact space and now at Amazon, how have you found those management tools? Like, how do they enable your work?
Yeah, well, let me just first say that if we have fantasies that what works in the private sector, if we just did the social sector like we did the private sector, everything would be okay. Let's not go there. So I think that, a lot of it is really understanding the differences in the sectors and what some of the reasons are that we have the different sectors, right? And so I think, for example, with the private sector, one thing I've really enjoyed a lot is the opportunity to experiment quickly. Is that Amazon has a concept about a two-way door decision versus a one-way door decision. And if it's a two-way door decision, meaning that it can be undone, we're encouraged to move quickly, test and experiment and see what comes out. If it's a one-way door decision, like building a homeless shelter into your headquarters, for example, we're going to take a lot more time to think about doing that before making that decision. But, but within a government sector, if you're talking about public policy, it can be more difficult to, kind of to experiment and to figure that out. And so I do think that some of the opportunity that we have is pulling the the good parts from each of the sectors, and trying to kind of fit the pieces together, which is part of why I'm so inspired by the Housing Connector example of really leveraging the Zillow platform, but working with social workers, right? Like how often does that happen? So I would say that some of the things that as I've come into Amazon from the social sector that I've appreciated is the relentless focus on customer. I do think that a lot of times when you're in the social sector, you get focused on rules, on guidelines, on funding mechanisms, on sometimes beating out your colleagues that work in the same field to get your legislation passed or your funding committed. And so I think that really having the intense focus on the customer, and in this case, we're talking about people that need housing, and and then how do we work backwards from their needs, and build in some more flexibility, because the thing I really learned deeply working in homelessness is part of the reason why issues like homelessness and housing are so complex is that the solutions really vary individual to individual. And so what works for one person doesn't work for another person. So it can be hard to get that replication that you can build into a private sector model of, Alexa, do X, Y, or Z, something like that. So I do think that it's been super exciting to think about large social issues from a private sector platform like Amazon. I think some of the things that we'll see, as I mentioned earlier, that will help us with the Housing Equity Fund, or at least I hope, is that bias for action and the speed, and then, but also really the flexibility of saying, these are kind of the guardrails of where we're heading. But if something changes that, makes us say, hey, we should look at it this way, the good news is we can change our mind and, and go in that way. And so some ways I've found it already fascinating as some people have approached us about the fund is some of it is you get are like, what are the rules? How do I fit into the box? And what I would say, if you're interested in the fund, what we're going to want to know is what problem are you solving? What's your creative idea to do it? Or if even if it's not creative, how are you going to do it really efficiently and effectively? And how is it really going to help people? And especially with an equity lens. That's what we want to hear about. So do not come and ask us what the rules are for the fund, because you're going to miss the opportunity of having something that's so awesome, like $2 billion from the private sector.
Do you, real quickly, do you have a way of taking people's information up and running yet?
Yeah, we have just an email address right now, Housing Equity Fund, one word, at Amazon.com. And so there's a small lean team behind that, but we have had people that are just sending in ideas or whatever. And again, we're looking at them and drinking from the fire hose with people that are expressing interest from these three regions. But if you have a great idea and you feel like it fits in with this direction, right, of kind of moving quickly, some kind of unique financing component, feel free to send an email to that email address. And oh, thank you. Somebody I see did type it in somewhere.
Yep, so, that's Luanda grabbing all the information and sharing it with the audience. Excellent. So I want to stick with this idea of cross-sector collaboration. And one of the things that so in my role, I spend a lot of time talking to both nonprofit and public side folks, as well as private side folks. And one of the interesting things to me is that when I find people in the private sector often asking with social problems, how much will it take to fix this problem? What's the check that I have to write? And who do I have to write it to? And Faith, I want to spin this question over to you. In our brief conversations, we know that trying to put a number on how do you create an affordable housing region is just like, it's an impossible task. Can you talk about why it's so difficult to get to a solid number like that?
Yeah, you had asked me for a number that would solve the problem earlier, and I can't give that. I mean, I think one thing that we need to recognize is that we have spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on this problem. So the tax credit program, which is the single most fantastic federal program for low-income housing, has in our state, I think there's been almost $15 billion worth of bonds and tax credits issued for housing. And I mean, it's created thousands and thousands of units, 53,000 units in King County alone, 120,000 statewide. Still, that's a drop in the bucket of what we need. So we can't really quantify it by numbers. I'm starting to really think about how we do this differently, and that we need to think about a systemic change for how we address our problem. And one of the things I've been working on recently that I'm really excited about, we ran a bill this session at the legislature that unfortunately just did not make it out of committee, but we got further than we thought we ever would. And this ties into one of the questions that came up earlier about rezoning areas. It's leveraging our $61 billion investment in light rail in our region and looking at buying up land around light rail stations and creating complete communities and planning for those complete communities to contain all the types of housing we need, from very low, very affordable, all the way up to home ownership opportunities, plus all the infrastructure you need, parks, shops, walkable communities, transit hubs, everything that you need for a community. And if we were to get ahead of this, and some of these stations are 10 years off, if we can get ahead of the real estate cycle and buy land and hold it, we actually have an opportunity to create 10,000 units per station, which would really then start to address our problems. And what got me excited about this early on was there was a UW studio done on this around the Kent Des Moines station, where they actually had the graduate students design what housing could look like at that station. They put in 10,000 units, a number of different teams did. And I looked at some of those project plans and they were gorgeous. They were the kind of community you would want to live in. And they were right there at light rail. So we need to start thinking differently about how we do our housing. And if we can get ahead of the curve like this, then we could figure out where we put our money, and we could coordinate our spending in a way that brings all of those different entities that I told you before working together to create communities. So that's, I think, our biggest struggle, and why it takes us so long right now is there's so many different people working on the same issues, and they're all wonderful and very devoted and have good programs and plans, but it's incremental right now, and it's not mass and at the scale that we need. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about these days, and that the people on this call are committed to these same ideas.
Jane, did you want to take along with anything that Faith just put out there? I feel like I saw a lot of nodding here. And
well, I just 100% agree. I mean, again, the investment our region is making in transit right now provides us such a terrific opportunity to build beautiful, equitable, inclusive, lovely communities for people to live. And but it does take that regional coordination and a regional approach that we just have to do. But the good news is that I feel like that is there's movement in that direction. I mean, the King County King County Affordable Housing Task Force is doing some great work. PSRC is doing some great work. A lot of folks are involved in this and trying to sort of think bigger and sort of plan for the future, and then, map backward to now. So I'm hopeful about it. We just need to do it.
Yeah.
Seattle people, make sure you come to Bellevue and go to Redmond and sort of tool around. Bellevue and Redmond people go into Seattle and tool around and see how connected this region is and how much growth is happening across. And we can't think municipality by municipality. We need to think whole.
Absolutely. I know that that's one of the things that we talk about internally on a very regular basis, is that many of the social problems and challenges that we have, and especially around housing, are not limited to a Seattle problem or a Renton problem or a Bellevue problem, but they are they are things that are affecting us as a region, and we need to all pull together. And if we aren't all pulling together, we're gonna start going into little fiefdoms and little kingdoms and trying to squander activity within those spaces. So I absolutely agree with you.
Can I make one more plug, Nicholas?
Yes, please.
And that
go
is
ahead.
when we all pull together, we need to provide for housing at all of the income levels,
Right.
not just homeless, low income, or home ownership. It needs to be all of them at the same time, and we need to impress upon our electeds that it's important to plan for all of those and fund all of those. You can't
Right.
just solve one of those slots because it's a system.
100% agree. I'm so glad you said that, Faith, because I feel like we've all sort of said it in bits and pieces, but that notion of the entire spectrum of housing needs and mapping specifically to where are we today, what is the inventory today, what is the growth in all of those categories is critical. The homelessness is coming up a little bit on the chat, and that is a very complicated issue. The city of Seattle and King County and the Sound Cities have all sort of made a bet together on the Regional Homelessness Authority, and we need to get that thing up and running and happening so that we have somebody thinking about homelessness across the region. But we also must have more very low income housing and low income housing, because all of these things impact the system. And if we can't solve for homelessness without finding permanent supportive housing for people to be in. We just can't.
Yeah. So just a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, please use the Q&A, because that's where we're monitoring them. We're going to start scooping up some of these as we enter the last 10 minutes of this conversation. So if you haven't asked them, now's the time to ask them. Our panelists have been doing an amazing job, unprompted by myself or our team, at answering questions in the chat, which, thank you, panelists, really appreciate that. So one question that I have, and I'm just gonna throw it out to the group and see who wants to jump on it first. But housing affordability in our country is not a new problem. This has been ongoing. And one of the things that's interesting to think about is how COVID has stimulated all the work from home activity and lots of companies making declarations around either going to hybrid models or fully remote models or something else. This most assuredly is going to stimulate growth in other markets. I'm positive of that. We're having conversations with other cities right now. San Francisco, you're seeing people flee. Nashville is seeing people tick up. With housing affordability being such an issue in especially tech-centered cities, what advice would you offer to other cities that are having an influx of tech come into them? And maybe more specifically, what policy pieces would you offer policymakers there?
I mean, I think one thing I would add, Nick, is don't wait until the problem arises for you to start investing. It's similar to transportation. Oftentimes you have to invest to see the return 10, 20 years. And sometimes in different communities, we wait until the problem is at our doorstep before we start investing and addressing it. So, whether it's something like Bellevue or a city like Nashville, like we all need to be looking at the problem and learning from cities like San Francisco and Seattle, and understanding that we are not unique and immune to the challenges that come as high-paying jobs enter our city. So that would be the biggest thing. Be proactive and don't wait until the problem is at your doorstep.
I've been thinking a lot about just how do we build in more flexibility? I mean, one of the things I found inspiring again, working in a corporation is how quickly we could move and make some changes on what we were doing. But I've also been really equally inspired by how quickly many of the public and social sector organizations, like when COVID came in, I think some of it is it showed us that we could. So I think some of my hope is that we build some of the DNA around thinking about, love your cat back there, Nicholas, some of the DNA about how to think more flexibly. And I think that, again, an area where I can see sometimes the social sector getting stuck, or elected officials getting stuck, is studying a problem so long that the problem changes by the time you're done studying it. And so what are some initial steps that can be taken at a smaller scale, and then really see, what the results are of them, and build on success. Like sometimes I feel like we in the social sector try to like bake the whole pie, instead of just, starting with the crust, or whatever the right cooking metaphor is there. So I think it's thinking about flexibility, and then, starting small more quickly, and seeing what we can get done that way too.
So one question that I find really interesting, this is an audience question. Caroline writes, rents have gone up 60% in a short number of years. And do we have no real way to control that? I understand there's a bill in the legislature to pay landlords to hold rents below market. It reminds me of the idea of preservation. What other tools are there to preserve? Faith, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that one.
Yeah, preservation is a tough one, because a lot of times it competes with the same dollars as are used for new construction as well. And so then the question comes up, is it better to preserve existing, or is it better to build new? And what adds to our housing stock? There's that acronym NOAAs. Have you heard of that one? The Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. We have a lot of those buildings as well. And the question is, and those are just market housing where the rents are lower. They're becoming fewer and fewer of them out there. The King County Housing Authority is doing a good job of snatching those up and trying to preserve those. So there are public entities that are out there buying, with thanks to money coming from both Amazon and Microsoft, that are trying to get a hold of those projects and preserve them. So it really is funding and broadening our funding sources to be able to do both preservation in addition to new construction.
And one just specific thing, I mean, there's some, this is a policy angle, both at the local and state level, and we can talk about federal too, but sometimes the incentives that are on books for developers, whether they're MFTE or the use of certain tax dollars or whatever, it's written into the law that it's for the creation of new affordable housing. And some of the efforts have been locally, even like, let's change that wording to creation and or preservation of housing, or extending different kinds of housing to different rental levels. Those kinds of things are important as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, one other question that just popped up was, what role do you think ADUs, DADUs, ADUs play in affordable housing for the coming decade?
I'm all for it. I'm a big fan of more housing, wherever we can put it. And that could be a stepping stone type of housing for people that are downsizing, or people that are moving from an apartment that can't quite afford a house. I mean, we need all of the various housing types we can get. Somebody asked a question about, what about teachers, nurses, police? I mean, again, we need housing targeted for that middle income tier as well. And that may not be rental housing, it may be entry-level homeownership housing, and that may be condos. So that's another area where we need to think about investing.
Yeah. Shkëlqim, I want to come back to you. We've deviated a little bit, sort of wandering through this conversation. I want to come back to you and your partnership with Zillow, because it seems like Zillow is a key enabler of the work that you do. Can you just talk a little bit about that partnership and sort of how it works and how you interact with them as a company?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, just like all of us, Zillow was looking to say, you know, how can they be a part of the solution in this community? And the work that we're doing with Housing Connector fits perfectly into the sphere that Zillow already is in. You know, they're already the experts at connecting folks looking for homes to folks that have homes. And so one of the things that worked really well here, Nick, is that they didn't have to stray away from what they are good at, what their core business is. It was simply tweaking it slightly to make it accessible to a new customer base. And so they have invested pretty significantly in this. They have a team of about 7 or 8 developers that focuses solely on developing this platform, maintaining and adding new functionality. I think Alice mentioned about the focus on the customer. One of the things that we're doing constantly with Zillow, and we meet on a weekly basis, is refining the experience for the case manager. You know, the case manager and the client is the customer. And so how do we ensure that this is a tool and a platform that meets their needs? But for us, what it allows us to do is really have real-time availabilities and make them accessible at every individual's fingertips when they're looking for housing. And so I always tell folks, like, technology is not the solution to homelessness, but it definitely can help, and it can make things more effective and efficient. And you know, huge props to Zillow for seeing that opportunity in a way that they could add influence and value and stepping up to that.
I think that's a really great note to wrap up the conversation on, really leveraging the expertise and the strengths of tech companies and them making some really phenomenal contributions in our community. It's fantastic. Before we go, I want to do a very quick lightning round. For any audience members here, I would like each panelist to state the one thing that they would like to see some person do that wants to engage in affordable housing. So Faith, I'll start with you.
I would say find and vote for those people running for office that know how to find common ground and are not afraid of compromise, because that's how we're going to get things done.
Great. Shkëlqim.
I would say dig below the headline and look at the data and the results.
Jane?
I'm frozen. I would say I'll just stick with MFTE, and let's learn about MFTE, learn what it is, learn what it isn't, and let's get out there and support it.
We'll make sure to send that as a follow-up to all the attendees. Alice?
I would say find the way that you can be a YIMBY, a yes in my backyard, instead of a NIMBY, not in my backyard. So it could be voting, it could be donating, it could be just, you know, asking questions about new proposals that are going up in your neighborhoods, as opposed to assuming that it's bad right away. It could be adding an accessory dwelling unit to your own home. There's all sorts of ways. So I think, like, YIMBY, I think we should be YIMBYs.
YIMBY.
Great. Well, thank you. A big thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. Big thanks to the audience for coming. We're happy to have you. Our next Beyond the Build event will be in late March, and we're going to be focused on COVID, tech, data, and vaccine delivery. It's going to be a great conversation. We will follow up this conversation with a variety of resources that will help you on your community engagement journey. Please stick with us. You can always follow us on any social media platform at C_city, or sign up for our newsletter. So thanks, everybody. Have a nice night.
Thank you.